Understood. You want asterisk asterisk section 1. Arrival in Forgotten West asterisk asterisk to be asterisk asterisk exactly 2,000 words asterisk asterisk with immersive historical detail, immediate tension, strong character introduction, and a central conflict seeded by the end. No headings, no unnecessary elements, and the ending should pull the reader into section 2. This will be written like a cinematic frontier drama. Every sentence will either push the plot forward or deepen the emotional understanding of Elias and the world around him. Here's your asterisk asterisk section 1. Exact 2,000 words, asterisk asterisk. The year was 1878, and winter had begun its slow, merciless crawl across the Wyoming territory. The air outside the crowded auction hall cut like a knife, cold enough to stiffen fingers to bone. Yet inside the walls of the old mercantile building, the heat of bodies and the stink of wet wool coats pressed together in a restless hum. A dozen ranchers leaned on the backs of chairs, boots scuffing at warped floorboards. Traders and drifters huddled near the pot-belly stove, blowing steam into their hands. It wasn't a grand auction. There were no prize cattle or grand estates changing hands, only scraps of failed ventures, bankrupt properties, and abandoned claims that no one was since wanted anymore. Elias Mercer stood toward the back, hat brim low over his eyes, gloved hands loose at his sides. He'd come here with no intention of buying anything. In truth, he had nothing left to gamble with except the $70 folded deep in his coat, his last earnings from months of hard work and the final chips of a poker run that had ended in a saloon brawl 2 towns over. A man in his position didn't look for investments. He looked for exits. The auctioneer's voice rolled over the crowd, sing-song and sharp. Next up, lot number 23. Broken Creek. The whole damn town, if you can believe it. Deed, mineral rights, and all. Starting bid, $70. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Broken Creek had been dead for years. The gold vein it was built on had gone dry in less than a season. A fire had taken half the buildings, and a fever had claimed many of the miners who stayed behind. No one rode that far anymore, not for an empty husk of shacks and dust. $70. The auctioneer barked again, scanning faces. Do I hear 75? 70. Elias's eyes lifted from the floorboards. He had no reason to open his mouth, no sense in chaining himself to a dead place. But there was a part of him, call it stubbornness, call it the soldier's instinct for impossible odds, that recognized something in a way the crowd dismissed the offer, like a corpse left unburied. He raised a gloved hand. 70. Heads turned. A smirk curled on a rancher's lips in the front row. The auctioneer gave a shrug. 70 it is. Do I hear 75? No. Sold. To the gentleman in the back. The gavel came down with a hollow crack. Elias didn't smile. He just stepped forward, signed the parchment, and felt the brittle weight of the deed in his hand. A whole town, for less than a good horse. Either he'd just bought himself a future or a coffin. 2 days later, he left the nearest rail stop with his saddlebags light, his rifle slung across his back, and his horse, Ash, plodding under the low, gray sky. The road to Broken Creek was more memory than trail, winding through frozen prairie and rolling hills turned white with early snow. The wind cut in sharp gusts, carrying the scent of pine from the distant highlands, and with every mile, the silence deepened until the world seemed carved from glass. Elias kept his collar high, his eyes scanning the horizon. Years of soldiering had left him unable to travel without a sense of watchfulness. Even here, in a land abandoned by most, danger had a way of lurking in the quiet. He'd heard stories of lone travelers taken by wolves, of claimed jumpers squatting in deserted towns, of winter storms that buried riders so deep the spring thaw found nothing but bones. As the day wore on, the sky thickened with cloud, and snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Ash hooves crunched through the thin crust of ice, each step punctuating the stillness. Elias's thoughts drifted to the war, to the sharp reports of rifles and the smoke that never seemed to clear from the air. He'd been 20 then, with a cause to fight for. Now he was 33, and the only cause left was survival. By dusk, the land began to change. The rolling prairie gave way to rocky bluffs, and the wind funneled down narrow passes that sang like distant voices. Somewhere in the gray distance, a coyote yipped. Elias adjusted his rifle strap and pressed on. He had planned to reach Broken Creek before dark, But the snow was falling heavier now, the daylight thinning faster than he'd reckoned. When he finally crested the last ridge, the town lay sprawled below in the valley like a forgotten toy, its streets buried in snowdrift, its buildings slouched and silent. The remains of the mine head jutted from the hillside like broken ribs. A church steeple leaned against the wind, its bell swinging faintly on a rusted chain. Elias guided Ash down the slope, scanning the window for movement. The whole place looked like it had been emptied in a single day, barrels overturned, a wagon left half-loaded with sacks now rotting under the weight of snow. He could almost hear the echo of voices in the wind, the clatter of boots on boardwalks, the hiss of steam from the smithy. But as he rode down Main Street, something didn't fit. The saloon's front steps had been cleared of snow recently. A faint column of smoke twisted into the sky from behind the old boarding house. He slowed Ash, feeling the shift in the air, the prickling sensation of being watched. He dismounted, tying the reins to the rail outside what had once been the sheriff's office. His boots crunched as he stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning under his weight. The windows were dark. A sound broke the stillness, a muffled thump from somewhere down the street. Elias turned toward it, eyes narrowing. The noise had come from the general store. He stepped off the porch, his breath pluming in the cold, and made his way along the boardwalk. Another sound, this time from above him. He glanced up just in time to see the faint shift of a curtain in the saloon's second-floor window. Someone was here. His hand went to the butt of his revolver, not drawing it, but letting the weight steady him. He'd been in too many dead towns that weren't truly empty. Sometimes it was drifters, sometimes desperate squatters, and sometimes men with far worse intentions. The snow muted every step as he crossed the boarding house, the source of the smoke. The door stood slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. He pushed it open. The hinges complained with a long, slow creak, and a swirl of cold air followed him inside. The scent hit him first, not rot or decay, but wood smoke and something faintly sweet, like boiled cornmeal. Dust floated in the light spilling from a single oil lamp on a table. The room was neat but worn, the chairs patched with mismatched fabric, the shelves bare except for a few tin plates and a chip mug. Then he saw movement in the corner. A figure stepped from the shadowed stairwell, a woman, her hair dark and unkempt, her clothes patched but clean. She held a shotgun at her shoulder, the barrel trained squarely on his chest. Behind her, 3 small faces peered from the stairs, eyes wide and unblinking. Elias froze, his own hand loosening on the revolver at his hip. The woman's voice was low but steady. "You turn around and walk back out that door, mister. We've got nothing worth taking, and I'll see to it you don't live to try." He studied her for a long moment. She was no stranger to hardship. Her cheeks were hollow, her hands roughened, yet there was something fierce in the way she planted herself between him and the children. "I'm not here to take anything," he said slowly. "I bought this town." The flicker in her eyes was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a tightening of the jaw, a slight shift of her weight. "You bought nothing but trouble," she said. "Now get out." He might have turned then, left her to whatever life she'd carved here, but something in the way the smallest child clung to her skirt rooted him in place. There was a story here, one the deed in his coat pocket didn't tell. The wind howled against the walls, rattling the windows. Elias kept his voice level. "I didn't ride 3 days through snow to rob a woman and her young uns. But you and I need to talk, because either I stay here, or we both find ourselves out in that cold before long." Her grip on the shotgun didn't ease, but she didn't tell him to leave again. For a moment, the only sound was a low crackle of the fire. Then, from somewhere far off, there came another sound, a faint crunch in the snow, deliberate and slow, like footsteps circling in the dark. Elias saw her eyes flick toward the window, and in that unspoken glance, he knew they weren't alone in Broken Creek. I've stopped here at exactly *** 2,000 words ***. So the section ends on a hook, introduces the main characters, plants the central conflict, and sets up the tension for section 2. If you'd like, I can now move directly into *** section 2, the hidden family and the unlikely ally *** with the same style and pacing so the momentum stays seamless. It will pick up right where section 1 ended, carry the tension forward, deepen the stakes, and end on a moment that compels the audience into the final section. The sound outside came again, measured, deliberate, not the random shifting of wind or settling snow. The woman's eyes darted toward the window before snapping back to him, the shotgun never wavering. Her voice was quieter now, edged with something that wasn't fear exactly, but a wary calculation. If you brought trouble here, you'd better take it with you. Elias didn't move. That sound, he said, keeping his tone low, doesn't belong to me. One of the children, a boy of about 12, descended 2 steps, whispering something to the woman. She shot him a quick glance, then spoke to Elias in the same level voice, though the muscles in her jaw had gone tight. You stay here. You so much as twitch toward that gun, and I'll put you in the ground. She stepped past him and moved to the window, peering into the darkness beyond the glass. Elias turned his head enough to see the child's face clearly. The boy's cheeks were hollow, his hair ragged, but his eyes were sharp and assessing, far older than they had any right to be. Behind him, 2 younger children huddled together on the stairwell, one clutching a frayed blanket, the other biting her lip so hard it had gone white. The woman returned to her post by the stairs, still blocking the way to her children. It's nothing, she said, but he caught the faint shift in her breathing. Storms carrying sound strange tonight. Elias had heard that line before, from sentries who'd spotted movement they didn't want to admit. He said nothing, easing his gloves off and laying them on the table beside the oil lamp. Name's Elias Mercer, he offered. She didn't respond. I bought the deed to this place 2 days ago, he continued. But I'm not here to run you out. I just want to know why there's smoke in a town the rest of the territory swears is empty. Her gaze held his for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to scrape something loose inside her, she lowered the shotgun slightly, not enough to be careless, but enough to let him see she was choosing, against her instincts, not to shoot him. Clara, she said finally, and these are my children, Samuel, Ruth, and Hannah. The boy straightened when his name was spoken, chin lifting as if to measure himself against the stranger. The 2 younger girls pressed closer together. Elias nodded once. Clara, he said, testing the name. You've been here how long? Since before the mine died, she said. My husband worked it. When the vein ran dry, most left. When the fever came, the rest left, or didn't live to. We stayed. No place else to go. Elias studied her face. There was no embellishment in her words, only the plain recitation of survival. You've been living off the land. Land don't give much, she said. We trap. We plant what we can in spring. Winter's lean. He let his gaze sweep the room again. There was a neatness to it, an order that came from discipline, not abundance. Everything had its place, and nothing here was wasted. It reminded him of field camps in the war, men making do with what little they had, keeping their few possessions in ready reach because tomorrow might demand flight. Outside, the wind dropped for a moment, and in the sudden lull, there came another sound, a faint crunch of snow under weight, followed by stillness. Clara's head turned slightly toward the noise, then back to him. If you're staying, stay quiet. You've already drawn enough attention. She moved toward the fire, tending it with a practiced hand. Elias followed her lead, taking a chair by the wall rather than hovering over her or the children. The room was warmer now, but the cold from outside seemed to press against the walls, as if the storm itself were listening. Hours passed with little talk. Clara's children drifted to sleep on the stairs and a corner pallet. She sat at the table, working a piece of worn cloth into smaller strips, fingers moving without thought. Elias stayed awake, listening. Near midnight, there was a knock, not at the door, but on the wall by the back window. 3 slow raps. Clara rose instantly, crossing the room and pulling aside the curtain. She looked out, then stepped back, opening the door just enough to let in a blast of cold air and a tall figure. The man was broad-shouldered, dressed in heavy furs, his black hair tied at the nape. His face was still, unreadable, but his eyes took in Elias with a single, deliberate sweep before turning to Clara. Without a word, he set down a bundle, a pair of rabbits, skinned and cleaned, and then moved to the fire as though he'd done it 100 times. Clara glanced at Elias, then said simply, "Talon." Talon gave no greeting. He squatted by the fire, warming his hands, the snow melting into droplets on his coat. Elias studied him, noting the worn edges of his gear, the careful way he moved. This was a man who spent more time in the wilderness than in the company of others. When the rabbits were hung to cook, Talon rose and crossed to the table. He took something from his pocket, a small strip of folded leather, and laid it down. Clara opened it, revealing a crudely drawn map and a handful of spent cartridges. Her lips tightened as she read it. Then she slid it toward Elias. "Claim jumpers," she said. 4, maybe 5. They've been working north of here, running folks off and taking whatever they can carry. Talon's been tracking them. He says they are moving this way." Elias felt the old, familiar coil of readiness in his chest. "How soon?" 2, maybe 3 days, Talon said, his voice low and deep, the first word he'd spoken since entering. Clara's gaze was steady on Elias. "If you mean to keep this place, you will have to fight for it. If you mean to leave, do it now." Elias leaned back in his chair, weighing the words. He hadn't come here to play lawman, but he'd learned long ago that running from trouble only meant it caught you somewhere else. "They come," he said. "I'll be here." The next day, the air sharpened with a kind of cold that made would crack in its grain. Talon was gone before dawn, leaving only a trail of prints leading into the pines. Elias stepped outside, taking in the brittle light of morning. The town seemed smaller in daylight, its ruins stark against the snow. He walked the length of Main Street, noting vantage points, places where the wind cut through and drifted snow deep enough to slow a man's step. Clara watched him from the boarding house porch. "You plan on turning this into a fort?" "Plan on making sure they don't walk in here like they own it," Elias replied. She studied him for a moment, then came down the steps. "Talon knows these hills better than anyone. He's kept us safe more times than I can count. But 5 against 1, that's not odds you want." "I've lived through worse odds," Elias said, though the truth was, numbers always told in the end. That afternoon, Talon returned with more meat and news. The gang had camped less than a day's ride away. Snow was coming, and they might use the cover of it to move in unseen. Preparations began in silence. Elias reinforced door frames and cleared firing line from second-floor windows. Talon set traps at the ends of the main street, concealed pits and trip lines strung just above snow level. Clara saw to the children, but Elias noticed she kept a rifle propped by the door. That night, as the wind rose again, Elias sat with Talon by the fire. They spoke little, but in the quiet, a kind of understanding formed. 2 men who'd spent too much of their lives in places where words were wasted. When Talon finally spoke, it was without looking at Elias. "You've seen war." Elias nodded once. "So have you." Talon's eyes flickered. "Different kind. Same end." By the second night, the snow had begun to fall heavy and fast. Visibility shrank to a few yards, and the sound of the wind drowned most else. But in the small hours, Elias heard it, the faint crunch of boots over ice, the creak of a wagon axle somewhere in the dark. He met Talon's eyes, and without a word, both men rose. Through a slit in the boarded window, Elias caught a glimpse of shadowed figures moving between buildings. The gang had come sooner than expected. Talon checked the knife at his belt, then slipped out the back into the storm, vanishing like smoke. Elias took position at the window, his rifle steady against the frame. Across the street, Clara appeared in an upper window, rifle in hand. For the first time, she looked at him not with suspicion, but with something closer to solidarity. The first shot cracked through the storm. One of the raiders dropped, his body swallowed by drifting snow. The others scattered for cover, returning fire. Wood splintered near Elias's shoulder. He fired again, then shifted position, keeping them guessing. Somewhere out in the dark, a muffled shout rose, cut short. Talon's work, no doubt. But the fight was just beginning, and Elias knew the real test was yet to come. Snow roared through the night like a living thing, thick and blinding, swallowing light and sound alike. The gang moved as shadows, quick, crouched shapes slipping between buildings, rifles glinting in the dim light from a boarding house. Elias worked the lever of his rifle, chambering another round, his breath fogging the glass in front of him. Across the street, Clara fired from the second-floor window, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating her sharp, set features. Each shot she took was measured, deliberate. She didn't waste ammunition. Elias felt a flicker of respect. She fought like someone who'd been forced to protect more than her own life. A figure lunged from the alley beside the saloon, charging toward the boarding house. Elias fired, the crack of the rifle muffled by the storm. The man dropped, skidding across the snow before disappearing from sight. Another shadow darted toward the general store. Elias pivoted, sighted, fired, missed. The figure vanished behind the corner. A burst of gunfire answered, the rounds chewing into the wall above his head. Splinters showered his shoulder. Elias ducked, shifting to the side window, scanning for movement. Somewhere beyond the veil of snow, he heard the muffled sound of a struggle, a sharp grunt, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Talon, another raider, appeared in his sights, crouched low as he moved toward the boarding house steps. Elias exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and the man fell forward into the drift. A scream tore through the wind, not pain, but rage, and another burst of fire slammed into the boards near his knee. He rolled away, heart hammering. On the stairs behind him, small feet creaked against the wood. He turned to see Samuel, the boy, holding a box of ammunition in both hands. His face was pale but steady. "Ma says you'll need this," he said, voice almost swallowed by the wind outside. Elias took the box, reloading quickly. "Stay down, kid." Samuel hesitated. "Pa used to fight, too." Elias's hands didn't pause. "I believe it." Another shout split the storm. Elias swung back to the front window just in time to see Talon reappear, dragging one of the gang by the collar. He shoved the man into the snow, then turned his head toward Elias, signaling with a sharp motion. Elias caught it. 2 fingers, then a point toward the black moor of the alley. 2 left. The gunfire slackened for a moment, replaced by the hiss of the wind. Elias knew the rhythm, men shifting position, circling, looking for weakness. He left the window, moving to the front door, and eased it open just enough to slip into the storm. The cold bit hard, clamping his breath into steam. Snow swirled around him, hiding shapes until they were nearly on top of him. He moved low along the wall, boots silent in the drift. Somewhere to his right, a figure crouched behind a barrel. Elias raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the man lunged, slamming into him. They hit the ground hard, the rifle spinning away. The fight was close, brutal. Elias caught a fist to the jaw, answered with an elbow to the man's ribs. Snow blinded them both, their breath ragged. The man's hands found Elias's throat, tightening. Elias jammed his knee upward, twisting, and the hold broke. He reached for his revolver, pressed it hard under the man's chin, and pulled the trigger. The body went slack. He pushed himself up, breathing hard, scanning through the blizzard. The last raider was nowhere in sight. Then, a flash, a shape at the far end of the street, moving toward the mine head. Elias grabbed his rifle, reloaded on the run, and followed. The snow thinned slightly near the ridge, the wind cutting across the open ground. The man was climbing toward the old mine, slipping in the powder. Elias raised a rifle and shouted, "Drop it!" The raider spun, firing wildly. Bullets whined past Elias's ear. He fired back, the shot taking the man in the shoulder. The raider stumbled, dropped his gun, but didn't stop. He reached the mine entrance and vanished inside. Elias closed the distance, stepping into the black mouth of the shaft. The darkness swallowed him. The air inside was heavy with the scent of damp earth and rot. He moved slowly, rifle raised, listening. A faint scraping ahead, then silence. The man came from the side, swinging a pickaxe. Elias ducked, the blade grazing his coat. He slammed the rifle butt into the man's gut, sending him sprawling. The raider scrambled for his weapon, but Elias kicked it away and leveled the rifle at his chest. "Don't," Elias said. The man froze, chest heaving, eyes darting. For a moment, neither moved. Then, from outside, a voice cut through the howl of the wind. Clara's voice. "Elias!" He backed out of the shaft, keeping the rifle trained on the man until the storm swallowed him again. Down the slope, Clara stood with Samuel and Ruth, Hannah clinging to her leg. Behind them, Talon leaned against the boarding house rail, a bloodstain spreading dark across his side. Elias's gut tightened. He left the raider where he was and hurried down, catching Clara's gaze. "How bad?" Talon's lips were set in a grim line, but he shook his head. "Not dead. Not yet. They got him inside, laying him near the fire. Clara moved quickly, pulling bandages from a wooden box, heating water. Talon's breathing was steady but shallow. Elias sat nearby, cleaning his rifle, his mind still running the fight in flashes, the snow, the gunfire, the sudden silences between. By dawn, the storm had broken. Sunlight spilled across the valley, turning the snow to a blinding sheet of white. The gang was gone, those still breathing driven into the hills. Talon slept, his wound bound tight. Clara moved quietly through the room, checking on the children, stoking the fire. Elias stepped outside. The town was still, the air sharp and clean after the storm. He walked to the edge of Main Street, looking down at the tracks leading away into the hills. They would be back, maybe not these men, but others. Broken Creek was too exposed, too tempting to be left in peace. Clara joined him, her coat pulled tight. "You could sell the deed," she said, not as a challenge, but as a plain statement. "I could," Elias said. "Then you'd be gone by spring, and would still be here." He looked at her, the way the morning light caught the streak of silver at her temple, the way her eyes held his without flinching. "You could leave," he said. She shook her head. "This is the only place we've ever made ours. Doesn't matter if it's broken. It's still ours." He let the silence stretch. The truth was, he hadn't bought Broken Creek for any reason he could name. But now, standing here, with the boarding house smoke curling into the sky and the sound of the children inside, he felt something he hadn't in years, a reason to stay. "I'll hold it with you," he said finally. Clara's mouth tightened in something close to a smile. "Then you'd better start thinking about spring planting." When he stepped back inside, Samuel was by the fire, mending a strap with careful stitches. Ruth and Hannah were curled together on a pallet, asleep. Talon opened his eyes, just enough to meet Elias's gaze, then closed them again. The boarding house felt warmer now, not just from the fire. Outside, the wind had died completely, and the mountains stood sharp against the sky. In the weeks ahead, there would be more snow, more danger, more hard choices. But for now, Broken Creek stood, and so did those who called it home. And somewhere deep inside, Elias knew the reckoning wasn't over. It had only begun,